We are in Revelation chapter 7 tonight. The goal, or at least what I anticipate us covering, is the entire chapter 7. And I think that's doable. If it's not, then I have no problem. We'll be here next week, Lord willing. The creek don't rise, so we'll cover it then. But as we get into chapter 7, yet again, where we're currently at, or where we've been. Chapter 1 gives us this great introduction. We see in here the vision of God, or Jesus, however you want to frame that division. Chapters 2 and 3 really hit home the letters to the churches. Chapter 4 and 5 begins giving us this picture into the heavenly realm. Chapter 6 is what we discussed last week, which was the opening of the scroll with the 7 seals. And so now we are into chapter 7. For your memory's sake, the 6th seal was opened in Revelation chapter 6, verse 12, when he opened the 6th seal. And so chapter 7 is this, in chapter 6, we went through 6 seals fairly quickly. Chapter 7 is this long pause that's given between the 6th seal's opening and the 7th seal's opening. The 7th seal opens at chapter 8, verse 1. The Lamb opened the 7th seal. So this is, chapter 7 is found in this pause, this moment where we're given greater detail into what's going on in between the seals. And so that's kind of where we're at as a precursor, as just a way so that you are aware of my perspective. Not that it's the gospel truth, but I'm sure I'm going to tell you my perspective on it. I think that what we're going to see in chapter 7 is a message of hope for God's people. Basically, whatever the world can throw at somebody, that does not matter. God is the one who is the victor, and if we will stick with him, then we'll be okay. So that's kind of what I'm going to emphasize in chapter 7. If you have comments, I know Greg spends a fair amount of time studying. I know that Billy spends a fair amount of time studying, and Laura told me that she's found a podcast. So
all day long, man, all day long.
All day long. I encourage you, if you've done some study or you have a question or a thought, feel free to just. That's it again. We're here to grow one another. I'm just going to give you whatever I can muster up, and then beyond that, the rest of it will be for you. Would someone read chapter 7 for us? It's a little lengthy, but in its entirety, please. I want to try to stick with our tradition.
I'll do it.
Okay.
After this, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth to prevent any wind from blowing on the land or on the sea or on any tree. Then I saw another angel coming up from the east, having the seal of the living God. He called out in a loud voice to the 4 angels who had been given power to harm the land and the sea. Do not harm the land or the sea or the trees until we put a seal on the foreheads of the servants of our God. Then I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 from all the tribes of Israel. From the tribe of Judah, 12,000 were sealed. From the tribe of Reuben, 12,000. From the tribe of Gad, 12,000. From the tribe of Asher, 12,000. From the tribe of Naphtali, 12,000. And from the tribe of Manasseh, 12,000. From the tribe of Simeon, 12,000. From the tribe of Levi, 12,000. From the tribe of Issachar, 12,000. From the tribe of Zebulun, 12,000. From the tribe of Joseph, 12,000. And from the tribe of Benjamin, 12,000. After this I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and in front of the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hands. And they cried out in a loud voice, "Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb." All the angels were standing around the throne and around the elders and the four living creatures. They fell down on their faces before the throne and worshiped God, saying, Amen. Praise and glory, and wisdom and thanks and honor, and power and strength be to our God forever and ever. Amen. Then one of the elders asked me, These in white robes, who are they? And where did they come from? I answered, Sir, you know. And he said, These are they who have come out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Therefore, they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple. And he who sits on the throne will spread his tent over them. Never again will they hunger, never again will they thirst. The sun will not beat upon them, nor any scorching heat. For the Lamb at the center of the throne will be their shepherd. He will lead them to springs of living water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes.
Thank you, Laura. Looking back at verse 1, and yet again, I know that takes a little bit of our time. And you got 45-minute class, and you spend a few minutes reading. I know it takes time. However, we're trying to stick with the tradition that begins at the beginning of the book. Blessed are those who read and read aloud, and blessed are those who hear. So I pray that that's a blessing unto us. Beginning at the beginning of chapter 7 now, we're going to see, we're told that there are four angels standing at the four corners of the earth, and that there is another angel, verse 2, who's ascending from the rising of the sun. We are highlighting the idea that the direction is coming from the east. What symbolism or what does that recall for any of you, if you have any recollection? Anyone ever visit old cemeteries?
Yeah.
Which way do they face the bodies?
East,
How come?
because that's the direction that Christ will come from when he returns.
If you didn't know that, that's old cemeteries. You'd face east for that reason. They wanted you to be prepared so that if
And
go ahead.
and they used to build churches with the doors facing to the east.
Didn't know that. Huh. Well, and the Eastern Gate,
And now it's supposed to be sealed up, and only Christ can open it when he comes.
the visions from Ezekiel would show us the new temple with an Eastern Gate that's been sealed, that only the Christ could open. So as I'm not going to say that that's the image that we're supposed to all pull from, but if I'm looking at a story that's talking about coming from the East, and I can think of some other visionary moments in our Bible that pull from an Eastern direction, I think it's worth at least acknowledging that when these four angels are coming, and we're highlighting it again in Eastern direction, that there's something to that. I don't know what that may be, but there's something to it. It says that there are the angels that are holding, that are standing at the four corners of the earth. What do you think that means?
Northeast, south, and west.
Northeast, south, and west. One guy that I read said that they believed in the flat earth. They didn't believe in a round earth, and so therefore you had the four corners. I don't know or care if they believed in a round earth or flat earth. I do tend to believe north, south, east, and west. We have these directions. And I think that this is, yet again, God's way of communicating that in a way that they understand.
That's kind of, we would do the same thing, except, we would use our vernacular. And that wouldn't necessarily mean we believe in a square earth
Yeah. Well,
or flat.
you think, later on when John's describing the holy city, are you saying a cross?
So you don't think of it as you think of 4 points.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily think of it as 4 squares.
Right.
4 corners.
Yeah. And so I see that, John's going to use the words that he understands and the words that he knows, and that the crowd's going to know, or whoever's going to read this is going to know. He's not trying to prove some sort of scientific point here. And we have to remember, is John physically in this place, or is he spiritually in this place?
Right, spiritually.
I'm going to go more on the spiritual realm, that he's somehow spiritually there. Now, does that mean that his body wasn't sent there in some way? I don't think so. I don't know. Doesn't say it's, I'm not going to say it's not, but the spiritual is the highlight of Revelation. The images that he sees are a spiritual image. So we're told now that there are four winds of the earth, that these angels are holding back. Why would they be holding the winds back?
Well, he says he wants to mark those with the seal on their foreheads, the servants of God, before they cause any harm on the land or the sea, which might inflict pain or hurt on them.
When we see wind, typically it's the sign of chaos. It's the sign that things are in turmoil. If you're out on the sea and the winds are great, the waves are going to be great, and that's going to be a problem. So what I'm going to say is that when we say the four winds are being held back, it is God giving the angels the moment, stopping. It's stop the chaos, stop the crazy. Because what is the highlight? And he says the highlight is we've got to mark the 144,000. So let's stop. And remember, when we ended chapter 6, what were some of the things that we saw in chapter 6? As the seals were being opened.
The four horsemen of the apocalypse.
The four horsemen of the apocalypse. And are they the most pleasant of creatures?
No. I mean, you've got a conqueror going forth, followed by bloodshed, followed by famine, followed by death and pestilence.
Boy, I am so excited for these four horsemen.
Yeah.
And so they're not bringing the news that people want to hear.
Hmm.
And I'm going to take that when we say the four winds are stopping, that the angels are holding them back. What I'm taking is that God is causing a moment of calm before the real crazy happens. For the mission that they're to seal the 144,000. Now let's talk about the 144,000 for a minute. What you think about them? And those of you online, don't be ashamed to speak up. Feel free to pipe in too. Anyone ever heard the Jehovah's Witness talk about the 144,000?
Mm-hmm.
No? Okay, got a couple of no's, got a yes. What's the Jehovah's Witness take on the 144,000?
That's the only one's going to be in heaven.
That's the only ones. They take it literally. That there's 144,000 and that's all. Which my smart aleck comment or thought is, if there's 144,000 going to heaven, do I really want to convert other people? Because then does that cause me to lose my seat? I don't know.
But if they did the 12,000 of each of these tribes and they already have the 144, then what the heck are we doing here? Because obviously we're not going. So that's just kind of stupid logic.
Well, in their theology, you inherit the earth.
Okay.
No, I'm going to heaven, baby.
We might as well all pack up and go home.
Right.
And so is Jehovah's Witness. These were all the Jews. This was well before we came around. So,
Yeah.
well, how can they be literal about it when, well, they can be, but they're left out.
I mean, there are 12 tribes listed, which I wouldn't give you $1, but if I had a buffalo nickel, I'd give it to you. If anyone could figure out which tribe's not listed here.
Dan and Ephraim.
Dan and Ephraim are the two tribes not listed here, which is interesting.
But then Joseph is listed, but his tribe was divided up between his two sons.
Mm-hmm. Which Manasseh and Ephraim. So Manasseh's listed. There are some interesting lists here and then you notice, like, this is something I noticed, they're not in birth order. But I don't know what the ordering means, if the ordering means anything. I will tell you that when we come to the 144,000, my approach, and feel free, you spent some more time, y'all got some other stuff going too. My outlook is that it is just it's an ultimate number of completeness. 12 being a complete number, 12 times 12, 144, being yet again a complete number. So I'm going to take the 144,000, and I'm going to give you, there's a couple of ways that I think we can do that. I'll get to some of those approaches here in just a minute. But I'm going to take it from the approach that the number is more on the symbolic side, not necessarily literal.
Doesn't verse 9 kind of blow that out of the water?
Go for it, Mike.
Verse 9 says no multitude, no, you couldn't even count, was there?
So if you got 144,000, well, we've already counted those, but now there's a multitude in verse 9. And that's where I'm going to come from, the figurative side. There is an argument that I want to share here just a second, Mike, that could lend you to 144,000, but even then it still allows for verse 9 to exist. I think what Chris said a moment ago is the point that probably brings this up into real concern. If you only had 144,000, these are all Jews listed. And I'm not a Jew. Well, I mean, we would come from the Gentile side of things. So that would be of concern as far as where does Jesus play into that role then. But I'm going to share with you at least what I think are three options on the 144,000. I think the first option, the first perspective, is that maybe that's just the martyrs. If you remember back at chapter 6, this is verse 9, who was under the altar? The martyrs. And they were told, what were they basically told? Reader's Digest version.
Wait until their full number.
So we know there's more martyrs coming. And so maybe one approach is that this is the 144,000. We're looking at those who are going to be martyred. And so comparing the number that was under the altar to who would be martyred in the coming days or during this time period, maybe that number reaches 144,000. So I think that's possible. But go ahead.
Why would they be considered Jews? And these are definitely Jewish names.
I'm throwing out options.
Right.
And I'm going to agree. I don't think that's the best choice, but it's an option.
Yeah.
It does come to the problem of how do we work the Jew-Gentile situation here? The second view that I think could gain some popularity would be that the 144,000 is the numbering of God's people at that time on the earth. Mind you, the people that are God's. Yet again, 144,000 is kind of this idea of completeness. And we know that if you go over to chapter 9 and verse 4, they were told not to harm the grass of the earth or any green plant or any tree, but only those people who don't have the seal of God on their forehead. So is it possible that those individuals who are sealed by God, for God's purpose, that were sealed earlier in the chapter, are the 144,000 at that time, exclusively to that time in history? I'll be honest, I still struggle with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I struggle with that because is Revelation designed to be interpreted literally?
from everything that I've listened to so far, Revelation's basically mostly symbolic. And if we knew our Old Testament the way these people do their Old Testament, because they
Yeah.
lived it, breathed it, heard it day in and day out, where I think we know the Old Testament, we don't really know the Old Testament, or at least I can speak for myself. But so I think most of all this would be symbolic, so they would understand where these signs and symbols are kind of coming from and how they relate back to the Old Testament, where we're kind of like, unless you're Greg, and then you probably know exactly where it's coming from.
Well, you have a comment, Greg? I'll make one after you.
Yes, that is part of the problem, that we don't understand this book because we don't know the first 39 books. We know a few snatches of the first 39 books, but when you get to the major and minor prophets, we're lost for the most part.
We're
I
well,
would also say that God, he's the only one that knows who's in the book of life.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we've heard. You know, that's what we hear is God's the only one that knows that when he opens that book up.
and ultimately, all of this is going to boil down to He's the one that knows. But as we've been going through Revelation, I've tried to highlight the idea that I want you to close your eyes and I want you to see these things. I take Revelation that it is more intended for us to experience it instead of analyze it. I'm going to agree with y'all's comment on we are ignorant of our Old Testament. And even if we fact knowledge knew our Old Testament, have you ever looked at some of the ways Paul would reference an Old Testament text and then would make application from it?
Well, why even go to Paul? Go to John.
Or go to John?
I mean, what does the Passover lamb's legs not being broken have to do with Christ on the cross and his legs not being broken? I mean,
And so somehow, oh, go ahead. I won't interrupt you.
I mean, it just don't compute in my brain.
Somehow the way they read and interpreted things is vastly different than the way we do. You know, I think of Paul, you mentioned John, the way that they will cite an Old Testament text and then will provide application or commentary on it in the New Testament doesn't make sense to me. The only way I know is I have to say, well, an inspired author is going to know the Old Testament better than I'm going to know it, so I have to trust it. But even then, if I adequately knew my Old Testament, I'm still going to be short-sighted.
You know, that you see that with the Sadducees when Jesus started becoming more open with what he would say back to them. It didn't, you know, what he was saying didn't compute with them. The same as what we're saying, it doesn't compute with us.
Yeah.
I'm a little curious, Josh, if it's, I'm reminded of Paul talking about the remnant of Israel that'll be saved. I'm curious if that's involved here. I don't know. I'm not a theologian, but I wonder.
You know, Mike, I think that's a great idea. I think that'd be a great way to look at this text.
Yes.
You know, I could see an argument against that because of, was it Galatians 6, where Paul begins to kind of say that the modern Christian is the new Israel. But
then you've got Romans 9, 10, and 11.
what are they saying?
Well, they say all Israel will be saved. And when you read that, you see two distinct groups of people. You see Gentiles and you see Jews. And I mean, I can't read it any other way. So that makes sense.
And so I think that, like I said, that's an option. That's a way to perceive who the 144,000 is. The last way I'm going to leave you with, at least, is that it could be all Christians from all time. Yet again, it's a complete number of those who have been marked by God. Out of the three that I've presented, I tend to buy into that third one personally. Mike, the one that you shared, I think has a great appeal to it. I think you could build an argument for about anyone. Does anyone have another interpretation they'd want to share before we move on? Muddy the water only enough for you. You know, the people are being sealed. Revelation chapter 14 and verse 1 gives us the idea that the sealing is with the name of God and the Lamb's name. But those names would be marked onto the people. And that's made in contrast to the mark of the beast, which comes up in chapter 13, verses 16 and following. And so we have these comparing and contrasting texts, which then leads us back to Ezekiel chapter 9, which is where the people of God were marked yet again as a symbol. Those people who were, this is Ezekiel 9, who were troubled by the immorality of Jerusalem were to receive a mark. Ultimately, who the 144,000 is, I'm going to let you wrestle with God on that. What I want us to focus on, though, is going to come into the, I guess, is it premillennial or millennial idea of the rapture? Because some people will come in and say, well, these 144,000 are people that are raptured from the earth and are removed before the great, what's that?
Great tribulation.
The great tribulation. Yeah. Uh-huh. That's verse 9 area. If you believe, so the question is, for those of you online, is the great tribulation, are the people, the great crowd in verse 9 different from the 144,000? I'm going to say yes, maybe ignorantly or foolishly, but I'm going to say yes just because we're told of 144,000 that are unique, and then we're told there's a crowd. Could they have all included the same? Could the 144,000 been a part of the great multitude? Verse 9, it's possible, and maybe that multitude included angels. What I find interesting in verse 9 is there's a great multitude, and notice it's not based just on. I mean, it crosses nations, tribes, people, languages. It is a all-inclusive kind of group. There is not well, you had to be Hebrew and speak Aramaic type mentality. It's anyone across the spectrum.
And within that, of a great multitudes from every nation, tribe, peoples, and languages. You're going back to Genesis 10 and 11, where
Abraham?
no, where the languages were confused at Babel.
Mm.
And then you bring that forward to Acts 2, where they heard in their own language. And then you're here. Everyone's represented. All tribes, all languages, all people groups.
Well, I hadn't thought about that. You pulled in Acts 2 with this. I'm thinking back to when the Abraham was called and promised.
Yeah.
And so I'm coming up to it a little bit, but he's told that it'll be his lineage will be the sands of the seashore, stars of the sky, a great multitude.
Right. And you get that in Galatians, among other things that Paul is saying there, that, when he makes the application that the seed is Jesus
Mhm.
and the people of faith.
This New International Version.
Go for it.
I think we need to keep, we're still doing what you said. We're trying to dissect this and interpret it from our view of what we think we know. This book was written to encourage those who were being persecuted at that time,
Mhm.
to give them hope,
Yes.
to realize with all the suffering they were going through, dying in a lot of different ways, they had hope. God was still in control. Evil would be conquered. Satan would be punished. Evil would be punished. But main thing was God was still in control. And we can't help it. We're still sitting here doing it. We're trying to interpret something in all its forms. I don't want to take away from your lesson.
No.
But I think we got to keep telling ourselves this about every couple of Wednesdays. We got to keep it in context, because all my life, this is what we tried to do with this, and we get pretty bent out of shape sometime about it. But
Mhm.
it was written for those people that were being persecuted at that time for encouragement. I thought you had a real good point there. Is this is a vision, and I think you're right on there. Close your eyes. That's what John was seeing. He was seeing a vision, and he probably didn't know what was. He didn't know either. I don't think he knew much more than we do, but it's an inspired word.
One, and imagine for a moment John's upbringing, where John, maybe early on, had the idea that only the Jews, let's say young John, said only the Jews are going to heaven. And then he encounters Jesus, and he sees Jesus crosses these boundaries. And so now, as he's seeing the heavenly realm, it doesn't matter whose eye. There's people from all over up there. And it doesn't matter what color, language, background, none of that matters. They're all there. And matter of fact, is kind of moving forward just a little bit. There's so many of them. It says they're innumerable. And that's actually not backwards. It's kind of right there with it. They were standing before the throne, clothed in white robes with palm branches in their hands. A palm branch for that time period would have been like a sign of victory. They've won the battle. It's a victorious time. Their clothes are white. And we find out in verse 14, why are they white? They've been washed in the blood of the Lamb.
Well, it
What's your idea,
says
Laura?
these were the ones who came out of the great tribulation. So when the end of times is coming and stuff, look how many times God gives people the chance to come to their senses and meet with God. And so I think this is for those people who had a change of heart, had a change of mind during the tribulation and came to him, which would signify kind of why they washed their robes, because they were stained with guilt and stuff. So then when they decided that, they saw the signs and they were going to believe, then they washed them so they would be clean for God. And that could be those people, which just basically, long story short, gives us hope that God is going to take care of those of us who confess his name and believe and try to live and walk in him. We have nothing to fear, because at the end of the day, he's going to scoop us up, save us, love us, and take good care of us. The people who need to worry are the people who are outside of that.
I said it, I forget what Wednesday it was. I said, often, I said, the book of Revelation is a book about God winning. We often stop there because the next question is whose side are you on? And that's what Revelation is telling us is if you're not washing your clothes in the Lamb's blood, I know what's happening. If you are washing in the Lamb's blood, I also know what's happening. I want us to focus for just a brief second here on verses 13 and 14 now, because you have an elder who looks to John and asks John a question. Do you think he's asking because John already knows the answer? Who are these people? Which is interesting. John doesn't even know. And then John says, you know, sir. John wasn't meant to know the question, but we're told that he then gives them the definition of who it is. These are the ones coming out of the great tribulation that have washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb. The point that's being made isn't necessarily who exactly these people are, and better yet, when exactly the great tribulation is or was, or will be. I said, my thought on the is was like, that's not the point that John's trying to get across. John's trying to get a point across that the people who endure are not going to be whisked away and saved from the tribulation, the turmoil, or the persecution. Those people are going to be enduring through it. Because were these people saved from that punishment? Or not punishment, punishment's a bad word. Were they saved from the tribulation?
I think John throws it back at the elder because the elder is there. He's standing before the throne and he knows who's in control. So he gives him his answer.
See, what I'm seeing is he looks back, he throws it back at the elder. The elder tells him who it is, and we're now enlightened at least to say these are the people who've washed their robe. I have a handout that I meant to give you sooner rather than later. And of course now I'm glasses up trying to walk around.
Just don't trip over yourself.
There you go, Billy. I tell you, Max, you can't lift your fingers.
Is it all three of them the same?
They're all the same, yeah. I'm looking at the quote on the middle of the page. This is for you, by the way. The paragraph, the section at the top is a chart that I meant to have available for you last week, and I didn't. The quote on the middle of the page reads this: "It is crucial that the reader understands this protection that's granted to the people of God. John does not envision literal physical protection from the faithful. At the scene of martyrs under the altar indicates, John expects that fidelity to the cause of Christ may cost a person his or her life. God's people are not exempt from trouble and suffering. In fact, in typical apocalyptic fashion, John expects persecution and the faithful to become even more severe during the last days. John has no special rapture theology whereby the faithful are exempt from the pains and suffering of the world. The Lamb who conquers is victorious through the path of suffering. The way of the Lamb is the way of the cross. Those who would be faithful to the Lamb cannot expect that their treatment should be any better than his. No, the protection afforded the faithful is spiritual protection. In spite of what happens, the people of God are secure in the arms of God." That's a quote from Reddish's commentary on Revelation. And I think that's the point that we're meant to leave with as I'm going to try and wrap up chapter 7 real quick, and maybe we'll get back into it next week. I see Greg's just chomping at the bit, but I'm also out of time. This is a book of hope. It's a book that tells people to look forward to something and to stay faithful while you're looking forward to it. So for you to have a recap, I'm going to give you 3 points. Your 3 preaching points are at the bottom of the page if you want them. But the 3 preaching points are that God's people are sealed and protected from God's judgment, not the pain that may exist, I'm kind of thinking of Jeremiah. I'm thinking of Isaiah. I'm thinking of Ezekiel. These were guys who were called by God, who suffered. They weren't protected from the pain, but God protected them in the end. Something that we did not get into for time tonight was the Holy Spirit's role in that. Is it possible that the Holy Spirit is the one who seals the modern day Christian? Ephesians chapter 1, verses 13 and 14. Point number 2, God is in the process of redeeming a big group of people. And when I say a big group, it's a group that goes beyond language, beyond boundary, beyond anything. And the question that I would ask is, do you want to be part of that group? And do you want to bring other people into that group? Third, faithful Christians are preserved through their suffering, not from their suffering. And yes, for those of you who are online tonight, I just got a text, and I'll try and get this emailed out to you so that way you can have it too. But so we'll make sure we'll try and make that available. Any final comments? I'm so sorry I have run out of time on us tonight. Any final comments though before we wrap up? And then feel free. We got a minute or two here.
Thank you. Good class.
Thank you very much, Mike. If you could see Greg's face right now, he is just,
He swallowed Tweety Bird.
he swallowed Tweety Bird wanting. You want to save it for next week? Or
You're
you
gonna,
wanna-
you're gonna have to give him a little equal time next week at the first of class to finish up whatever he wanted to say.
There we go. There we go.
Makes you wonder how long John's vision was. He must have been several nights.
It was long, 45 minutes, we know that.
I couldn't even written this in 45 minutes. So thank you very much for joining tonight. Thank you for being a part of the class for the discussion. For those of you online, I'm very thankful. Let me get you back to my camera if I can. There you go. Thanks for joining with us online.